Well, hi everyone, and welcome to another fun-filled edition of Adam's Music Box, where today I want to talk about a story that's been very viral, and that's that the great Alex Van Halen is auctioning off everything musical that he owns. All of the drum sets, the cymbals and snares, the sticks, the road cases, the monitoring system, the accoutrements, posters, and other road paraphernalia. He's selling it all off, and most people have taken this as a sign that Alex is going to retire from playing. Of course, the last time that he played anywhere in public was at the final Van Halen show, which took place almost 10 years ago in 2015. So it's a pretty safe bet that Alex's drumming days are over. Now, this is upsetting a lot of fans, which is not unreasonable because they like to see Alex Van Halen play. And I think many people were especially hoping that he might sit in at least at one or two gigs with the Van Halen tribute, let's just call it that, that Sammy Hagar's putting out. It's literally the closest thing we're going to get because it's got Michael Anthony on bass, it's got Sammy Hagar on vocals. Obviously, Ed tragically died, for those who don't remember, in 2020. Feels like yesterday. Still can't believe he's gone. And Alex, apart from paying tribute to his late brother when he passed in 2020, hasn't really said anything, hasn't really been seen in public, at least not where any cameras are. And some people have said he's reclusive, which I suppose he's become, but he wasn't always like that. People have to remember that the band did a lot of interviews as a four-piece, all four of them together. That was true of both the original lineup with Roth and the second lineup with Hagar. But it's also true that the two brothers did a lot of interviews together. And Alex was almost like the guard dog. He was the one that was always sticking up for his brother, defending his brother. And when Sammy was first invited to 5150 Studios in the Hollywood Hills to effectively audition for the band, he said that Alex was sort of acting like a lawyer, saying, "You've got to sign this non-disclosure form and sign this release." And Ed was the one saying, "Whoa, man, let's just jam." And that's what it became. But Alex was definitely, and he was very protective of his brother. And so obviously that's been a void in his life. And there can be no Van Halen. The tribute that Sammy and Mikey are doing is just that. It's a tribute, and it's lucky enough to feature two of the men who were there for the real thing. That's a pretty good tribute. It would be horrific, I think, to call anything Van Halen that didn't have Eddie Van Halen in it. That would just be wrong. So I think what Sammy and Mikey are doing is very classy. John Bonham, not John Bonham rather, but Jason Bonham, John's son, is a really good drummer who will very capably play Alex's parts in his own style. Won't sound like Alex, but it will sound really good. And Joe Satriani, if anyone was going to be playing Eddie's parts, most people would agree that's where the consensus is. But this leads me to something else, away from the sort of the drama that is never far from Van Halen. Let's talk about what it means to music, because obviously Van Halen were about the music more than anything else. The drama and the personality clashes are fun, but I think what us fans really like is that the music was really, really good. Well written, well played, memorable, exciting, uplifting. We love it. What else is there to say? Well, let's talk about retirement in the music industry because there's a lot to be said for going out on top. And in this sense, we can compare what's going on with Alex Van Halen now to what happened a few years ago with Bill Bruford. Now, Bill Bruford retired at a very young age for the music world. I think he was still in his 50s when he put up his drumsticks for retirement in the very early 2000s. And just a few years ago, Bruford auctioned off all of his drum equipment because he obviously declared his retirement. He wrote a book about it and went into sort of academia. He's a PhD and an author and all the rest of that. He always acted like that anyway. But with Alex, I think we've got a similar story. 2015 was the end of Van Halen because Ed got sick and he died. And so that was the end. I don't know if at the time they knew they were going to retire for other reasons, maybe just that it had reached its logical conclusion. But Alex was drumming really, really well up to the final gig. So I think much like Bruford, you can say that Alex Van Halen retired on top. And more musicians really ought to do that. Obviously, those who need the money have no choice. But if you don't, I think that there is a lot to be said about going out on top rather than doing the act of getting progressively worse on stage, where the fans are sort of buying tickets to see you more just because you're there rather than because you're doing something good. And in that sense, Alex Van Halen went out on top. Eddie Van Halen went out on top. Wolf obviously was just beginning his career, so he didn't go out at all, but he's moved on now to his solo work. In terms of Dave, who was the once and future final singer of Van Halen, his voice wasn't at its best in the last few tours, but he never really took great care of his voice, even in his prime. Hence, you've got great gigs, perfect gigs like the Oakland gig of '81 that was partly filmed, and then some other gigs like the US Festival where substances may have played a part in that particular vocal performance. But be that as it may, um, I think it's kind of unfair for fans to sort of beg Alex to do one more thing. His decision's been made. He's putting up the drumsticks. And again, like Bill Bruford, he's writing a book about it, which for someone who hasn't done any interviews since his brother died will be very interesting. It's coming out in October, which is after the Sammy Hagar and Michael Anthony sort of tribute concert tour ends, and it's all about him and Eddie. It's called Brothers, and it will be really interesting to hear what Alex has to say. So let's congratulate Alex on what is likely, almost certainly, a retirement from music. But let's hope that he knows that the fans love him. And I think most of the fans understand what he must be going through after losing the person he's been with all his life on stage and off. Like, subscribe, and we will see you next time. Take care.